am Marcus Struos, 79 years old, an African-American man who has lived long enough to see the world turn its back on the very people who built it. I was born in Montgomery, Alabama in 1946 when being black meant working twice as hard for half as much. My father worked the railroads, his hands always covered in dust, his back bent but his pride unbroken. My mother cleaned diners and sang hymns on Sundays with a smile that could make even pain sound like hope. I grew up believing that struggle was the language of life, and I learned to speak it fluently. I didn't have luck. I had hunger. Hunger to prove myself, to rise above the dirt that life threw at me. When I was old enough to hold a wrench, I started fixing engines, saving pennies in a jar that sat beside my mother's Bible. By 23, I had enough to buy a used truck, rusted, dented, and half dead. That truck became the first heartbeat of my future. 79 years old, an African-American man who has lived long enough to see the world turn its back on the very people who built it. But I worked it like it was gold. I was born in Montgomery, Alabama. I drove through sleepless nights, through rain, snow, and miles of lonely roads. Slowly, my father worked the railroad, then 10, his hands always covered in dust. By the time I was 45, his back bent, but his pride unbroken. I was known across 3 states as the man who never missed a delivery and sang hymns on Sundays with a smile that could make even pain sound like hope. But behind every strong man, struggle was the language of life, and I learned to speak it fluently. She was light in human form. I had hunger, gentle voice, hunger to prove myself, to rise above the dirt that life threw at me. She believed in me. When I was old enough to hold a wrench, I started fixing engines, saving pennies in a jar that sat beside my mother's Bible. But she made our little house feel like heaven. By 23, I had enough to buy a used truck, rusted, dented, and half dead. Make your father proud. That truck became the first heartbeat of my future. But not in the way I expected. Struos Logistics. It was nothing at first. The best schools, truck and the finest suits, but I worked it like I could only dream of. I drove through sleepless nights, through rain, snow, and miles of lonely roads. I nearly fell to my knees. Slowly, one truck became 5. Then when he graduated, I felt like every sacrifice had finally meant something. I was known across 3 states as the man who never missed a delivery. I was wrong. And never broke a promise. When Clara passed away, something inside me broke. The house behind every strong man, the company busier than ever, stronger. And Ethan had become the new face of Struos Logistics. She was light in human form, gentle voice and soft laughter, a man of numbers and quiet storms. But he had no patience for me before I believed in myself. He thought compassion was weakness. When we married, I promised her a life she could be proud of. One afternoon, he called me into the office. She made our little house feel like heaven. When our son Ethan was born anymore. She held him in her arms standing by the window, talking on the phone, proud, looking powerful in his expensive suit, but not in the way I expected. When he hung up, he said, without even turning to face me, the best schools, the finest suits, the kind of life I could only dream of. You've done enough. He was sharp, confident, and ambitious. A retirement home. When he got into Harvard, I nearly fell to my knees, thanking God. I stared at him, waiting for a smile that I felt like every sacrifice had finally meant something. I asked quietly. I thought I had raised a good man. You want to send me to a home? I was wrong. He said, Dad, it's not like that. Away, something inside You'll have nurses, friends, comfort. The house was quiet. The company busier than ever. Deep. And Ethan had become the new face of Struos Logistics. That night I sat alone looking at Claire's man of numbers and investors. She was smiling in her floral dress for people. The one she wore on our 25th anniversary. He thought compassion was weakness and humility was old-fashioned. You'd be ashamed of what your son me into the office. Then I packed my bag, sold what I feel like mine, and left the house I had built. He was standing by the window. For months I lived in a small rented room downtown, looking powerful. People saw me as an old man past his time. But I wasn't done. When he hung up, he said, without even turning to face me, washing dishes at a local cafe, sweeping floors, saving every dollar. You've done enough. I watched the world, place for you, learn a retirement home. Technology had changed everything. Young men were making millions waiting for a smile that would tell me he was joking. But what they didn't have was patience. It never came. And patience is what I had in abundance.
You want to send me to a home?
Every night after work,
He said,
I
Dad,
went to
it's
the
not
public
like that.
library and studied. You'll have nurses,
I learned
friends,
about
comfort.
online business.
You deserve that.
Delivery apps,
Comfort, renewable
the word cut
energy,
deep.
and market trends.
I nodded,
I
stood
wrote
up, and
ideas
left
in
without another
notebook
word.
titled The Second
That
Rise.
night I sat alone looking at
It
Clara's
became
picture.
my new Bible.
She was smiling in her floral
After
dress.
2 years,
the one
I
she
used
wore
my
on our
savings
25th
to start something
anniversary.
small again.
I whispered
A
to her,
delivery service for
"You'd be
senior
ashamed of what
citizens.
your son has become.
Groceries, medicines,
Then I
small
packed my
errands.
bag,
I
sold
called it
what I
Golden
owned,
Wheels,
and left the
At
house
first,
I had
people
built.
laughed.
Who'll
For
trust
months,
an
I
old
lived
man
in a
with
small
deliveries?
rented room downtown.
They said. People
But
saw
I
me
didn't
as an
hire
old man
young
past
men.
his time.
I hired
But I
people
wasn't
like
done
me.
yet.
Retired
I started
drivers,
working
widows,
again, washing
ex-accountants,
dishes at a
grandmothers
local
who
cafe,
still had
sweeping
fire in their
floors,
eyes, saving every
We
dollar.
understood our customers
I
because
watched
we
the
were
world,
them. Learned from
We
it.
didn't just deliver
Technology
packages.
changed everything.
We delivered
Young
dignity.
men were making
In 3
millions
years,
from
Golden
screens,
Wheels became a
not sweat.
phenomenon. But what
Hospitals
they didn't
partnered
have
with
was
us.
patience.
Retirement
Patience is
homes
what I
relied
had
on
in
us.
abundance. And my name
Every
began
night
to
after
circulate
work,
again.
I went to the public
Marcus
library and
Struos,
studied.
the comeback king.
I learned about online
Investors
business,
lined
delivery
up.
apps.
I expanded
renewable
across
energy,
the country
and market trends.
Reporters
I
came
wrote
for
ideas
interviews.
in a notebook.
I was on
titled
magazine
The Second
covers.
Rise.
An old man who had
It
risen
became
twice
my new
in one
Bible.
lifetime. Then one
After
day, my
2
secretary
years, I
came
used
into
my
my
office
savings
and
to
said,
start something
"Mr.
small
Struos,
again. A
there's someone
delivery
here to
service
see you."
for senior citizens.
He says he's your son.
Groceries, medicines,
I turned
small
around,
errands.
and there stood
I called it
Ethan.
Golden Wheels.
His face
At first,
was pale,
people laughed.
his eyes tired.
Who'll trust an old man with
The shine was
deliveries?
gone.
His
They
company
said,
had gone
but I
bankrupt
didn't hire
after
young
a series
men.
of bad
I
investments.
hired people like me.
His
Retired
friends had
drivers,
abandoned him. Widows,
The
ex-accountants,
mighty man who once sent
grandmothers who
his
still
father
had
to an
fire in
old
their
home
eyes.
now stood before
We
him,
understood our customers
broke and
because we were
trembling.
them. We didn't
"Dad,"
just deliver
he said, his
packages.
voice cracking,
We
"I need
delivered
your help."
dignity.
In
I've
3
lost
years, Golden
everything.
Wheels became a
I
phenomenon.
looked at him for a long
Hospitals
moment.
partnered with
Then I
us.
said,
You told
retirement
me once
homes
I needed
relied
rest.
on us.
Maybe it's your
And my
turn
name
now.
began to
He
circulate
looked down
again.
ashamed.
Marcus
But I
Struos,
wasn't cruel.
the comeback king.
I offered him a job at
Investors
Golden
lined
Wheels.
up. I
Not as a
expanded
manager,
across the
not
country.
as a director, but
Reporters
as a delivery
came for
man.
interviews. He
I was on
hesitated,
magazine
but hunger
covers.
makes pride vanish.
An old man who had
He
risen
accepted.
twice in one
Now
lifetime.
every
morning my son drives
Then one day, my
vans.
secretary
He
came into my
delivers
office
groceries
and
and
said,
medicine to the
Mr.
same kind of
Struos,
old people he
there's
once
someone
thought
here
were
to
a
see
burden.
you.
He
The
says
same
he's
kind
your
of man
son.
he once sent away.
I
He
turned
calls me
around
sir,
and
and
there
there
stood
dad at
Ethan.
home.
His
He's
face
learning
was
what I
pale,
learned a
his eyes
lifetime ago.
tired.
That respect
shine was
is
gone.
earned, not
His company
inherited.
had gone bankrupt.
Sometimes
after
I
a
watch
series
him
of
from my
bad
office
investments.
window, loading up his
His
van
friends
in the
had
early
abandoned
dawn
him.
light.
The mighty
I don't
man
feel
who
anger
once sent
anymore.
his father to
Only
an old
peace.
home now
Because
stood before
revenge,
him,
when it's pure,
broke
doesn't
and
burn.
trembling. It heals.
Dad,
I call it
he
sugar
said, his
revenge.
voice cracking.
Sweet, quiet,
I need
and
your
patient.
help. The kind
I've
of
lost
revenge
everything.
that teaches instead of
I
destroys.
looked at him for a long
Now
moment.
at 79,
Then
I
I
wake
said,
up every morning
"You
with
told
purpose.
me once I
needed rest. The business
Maybe
thrives.
it's your turn now."
My employees
He
adore
looked
me.
down ashamed.
My son has found
But I
humility.
wasn't cruel.
And every
I
night
offered
when
him
I
a
sit by
job
the
at
window
Golden
watching the
Wheels.
city glow
Not as a
beneath me,
manager,
I
not as
whisper
a
to
director,
Clara's
but
photo.
as a delivery man.
You were right,
He
my love.
hesitated, but hunger makes
The
pride
fire never
vanish.
dies.
He
It just
accepted.
waits for the wind.
Now every morning my son drives one of my
sometimes,
vans.
when the wind
He
rustles
delivers
through the
groceries
curtains,
and medicine to
I
the
swear
same
I hear
kind
the
of
voice
old people
again,
he once
soft
thought were a
and
burden,
proud,
saying,
the same kind of man he
"You
once
did
sent
good,
away.
Marcus.
He calls me sir.
You did
at
real
work
good."
and dad at home.
That's my story.
He's learning
The
what I
story
learned
of
a
an old
lifetime
man who
ago.
lost everything.
That respect
only
is
to
earned,
rise again,
not inherited.
not to destroy his
Sometimes
son,
I watch him
but
from
to
my
teach
office
him what
window,
life forgot
loading
to.
up his van in the early
Because
dawn
time
light.
may steal your youth,
I don't feel
your
anger
love
anymore,
and even
only
your strength.
peace. But
Because
it can never
revenge,
take
when
your
it's
will.
pure, doesn't burn.
And as long as a
It
man
heals.
still has will,
I call
he
it
is
sugar
never
revenge.
truly old.
Sweet, quiet,
That is
and
my
patient.
truth.
The
That
kind
is
of
my sugar
revenge that
revenge.
teaches instead of destroys.
Now at 79, I wake up every morning with purpose. The business thrives. My employees adore me. My son has found humility. And every night when I sit by the window watching the city glow beneath me, I whisper to Clara's photo, "You were right, my love." The fire never dies. It just waits for the wind. And sometimes, when the wind rustles through the curtains, I swear I hear her voice again, soft and and proud, saying, "You did good, Marcus. You did real good. That's my story." The story of an old man who lost everything, only to rise again, not to destroy his son, but to teach him what life forgot to. Because time may steal your youth, your love, and even your strength, but it can never take your will, and as long as a man still has will, he is never truly old. That is my truth. That is my sugar revenge.